Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our webinar dedicated to project development in the Czech Republic. Actually, we're very excited because this is the first webinar that Solarplaza is organizing on the Czech Republic, and we have the honor of counting on the Solar Association from the Czech Republic. Actually, Jan Křmár is here with us today. Hi, Jan. How are you doing?
Great. How are you?
Good, good. Thanks for being here, and it's indeed a pleasure. We mark a milestone here, and today in this webinar, we're going to talk all about the Czech Republic. So I'm going to present an agenda for today for all the participants. Be very welcome from wherever you're listening to us. And in terms of the agenda, we're going to make first a brief introduction from my side, from Jan's side. And then we're going to, of course, dive right away into the topics. Just to summarize what we're going to talk about here today. First of all, we're going to look at a snapshot of where we are in terms of the PV market in the Czech Republic, and we're going to look at the evolution of PV towards the end of the decade. Then we're going to look at the RES Plus program, which is part of the Modernization Fund from the European Union. So we're going to look at the subsidies that are available, that are currently ongoing right now, and how you can apply for them. Then we're going to look and we're going to explain at the project development cycle. Then we're going to explain some of the key challenges that you might encounter on that development cycle, and how's the regulatory outlook for for actually minimizing those barriers, those bottlenecks. And we're going to finalize by then giving some considerations into the business model. Of course, we're going to end up with some Q&A. So we really like you to participate on the webinar together with us, to put up your questions, and we also have some polls prepared for you to know who's on the other side. But without further ado, for those of you that don't know Solarplaza Consultancy, we're part of the Solarplaza group. We are supporting the solar value chain in entering new markets. So either this could mean new countries, this could mean new segments. Specifically for service providers, we can support you to better understand the demands and your target audience for a certain product or service. And we also work very closely with investors, supporting them to originate co-development partnerships or acquire new projects. So if you want to know more about who we are and what we do, you can find a bit more information on solarplaza.com/consultancy. Then something else that I want to mention here is that in this webinar, we're going to discuss some specific points about project development and subsidies in the Czech Republic, but we have actually prepared a much more in-depth report on the Czech solar market that you can purchase, and it's available on our webpage. So it basically goes more in depth into the development cycle, step by step, looking at the milestones, at costs, and also an in-depth portray of how you can apply to subsidies and how the business model looks like. Jan, over to you.
Thank you, Marcel. From me as well, hello. My name is Jan Křmár. I'm the director of the Czech Solar Association. Maybe a few words about our association. We are the biggest association of solar energy professionals in the Czech Republic, with 600 members that basically cover the whole life cycle of PV, from project developers, installation companies, banks, lawyers, investors, universities, individual companies. Basically everybody who deals with solar power in the Czech Republic is welcome in the association. And to divide our work into two main bits, we lobby for better development or better possibilities for renewables, in particular solar, both ground-mounted and rooftop. And also we assist our members with their business in trying to identify and eliminate hurdles, connect members to some business opportunities. So this is basically our work in a nutshell.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Jan. And then in terms of practical notes, before we start with the content, if you have any questions at any point, don't wait for the end. Just use the questions or the chat on the section on your right corner. We will answer your questions after the presentation. If you run onto some technical issues, we are here to help you as well, so you can use the same two boxes that I mentioned on your right. And yeah, you don't need to take notes or screenshots, because all of this will be available afterwards, typically after 1 or 2 days. So you can listen to us again, and you will also receive the slides. And now I want to launch a first poll to get to know who's on the other side. And yeah, I'm just gonna quickly read it here for you. Is your organization involved in the Czech PV market? So we want to know how you are involved already in the market, if you're active or if not, and if not, if you're planning to enter in the coming months, or you're not sure, you're considering it, and that's why you have joined us practically. So let's give a couple of seconds for people to vote here, and then when we're ready to see the results, then we can share it with you and give a brief comment. So looking here for the signal that we're ready. All right. Interesting. So almost half is already in the market. Almost half. It's considering the market. Only a few ones are already with a first step there and checking how to continue entering. But we have quite a big proportion of people looking at entering the market. Does that surprise you, Jan? How can we look at this?
Well, it's encouraging. I'm hoping that those companies that are active in the Czech market are not all Czech companies, but hopefully foreign companies. We know from experience that quite a lot of investors were active in the Czech market from abroad 13, 14 years ago. So it's good to see that maybe now they're coming back. And because the Czech market is quite diverse, it makes a lot of sense. And of course, the encouragement that there are some companies planning to move in. So it's I take that as a very, very positive message.
Great. Let's continue with that positive note. And indeed, it's true that there were quite a lot of international companies active in the market in 2009, 2010. So it's a good cue for this topic, which is just a brief snapshot of where we are. And indeed, here in around 2006, the feed-in tariff scheme was introduced in the Czech Republic. That's when the first development activities began. Then, of course, after a couple of years, we started to see the results of that, so the installations. And then we can see here that a huge part of the solar capacity was installed in 2009, 2010. Most of these large-scale utility plants, but then because of the huge burden for the taxpayers in the Czech Republic, the government decided to cut the tariffs, I believe, to practically half, and this really impacted the investor confidence in the market in terms of the long-term perspective, right? So what happened here is that there was an exodus of companies, both international and local as well, because we definitely know quite a lot of Czech companies that started acting abroad in other European, but also other international solar markets. And here we have a bit of a plateau after that. It's true that in 2017, 2018, there were some subsidies introduced for residential. Then afterwards, some subsidies into big commercial, but we couldn't see here a big boom, right? Maybe because, well, first of all, we're talking about smaller scale, but also in terms of the commercial sites, there were lengthy procedures to practically install these projects, but also there was an oversaturation of the players that are actually installing these PV assets. Here in 2019, there was in 2021, the Modernization Fund was put into practice to the RES Plus program in the Czech Republic. So it was announced, and the first round or the first open calls for projects started in 2021, and the results were published in 2022. So of course, we're not seeing, although the results were quite good, we're not seeing that bump yet, of course, because the projects resulting from from that call will still be installed. But let's look a bit now into, well, actually, I might have jumped the gun, because even before looking at the future, I hope you haven't looked too much into it. But we actually have a poll question for you to have a bit of a notion of what you expect will be the growth of the market. So here we want to ask you what you expect to be the growth potential for the Czech PV market between now and 2030. So do you think that the market will add between 1 or 2 gigawatts, between 2 and 4, between 4 and 6, or you're an optimistic and you think it will be more than that? Let's wait for the results. Let's analyze the results, but then we'll give you some scenarios of our own. We're gonna still wait for a couple of seconds before sharing the results. So please do vote still. You still have a chance to do so. Okay. Let's see. So let's say that almost split thirds on 1 to 2 gigawatts, and another split third on 2 to 4 gigawatts. So the majority of people here, almost 70% believes that this will be below 4 gigawatts. Yanis, is that the likely scenario that we still are going to add 4 gigawatts, or will you expect that to be a bit more, and maybe people were not so optimistic?
We're of course hoping that it'll be much more. We're also orienting ourselves on figures from the Czech PV. It says that potentially up to 11 gigawatts could be installed technically from their side until 2030, and it all depends obviously on some scenarios which we're coming to, but maybe just as an orientation factor, our biggest energy producer, ČEZ, has announced plans that they themselves want to connect 6 gigawatts until 2030. So we're hoping that the final number will be more, but it all, as in every country, it all depends on several factors. So I think each of those scenarios is possible, and we can see slow growth, we can see really quick growth. I personally think that it will be more than 2 gigawatts until 2030. That's my own personal opinion, because a lot would have to go wrong to be the case.
Yeah, let's look at that. If you can walk us through the scenarios.
Sure. In the Solar Association, we calculated some scenarios. As a baseline, the blue line, we're taking the plan outlined by the National Energy and Climate Plan, which was passed in 2019, 2020, which, as of course we know, will have to be updated, because in the meantime, the European Union's target was updated, was raised from 32%. So even this plan will have to be raised. This very conservative NECP calculated or is counting on roughly 2 more gigawatts added by 2030. As opposed to that, you can see that even our pessimistic scenario outgrows the NECP plans. This pessimistic scenario is based on the assumption that we will build mostly only rooftop power plants, because in the Czech Republic until now, the last 10 years, we've only built rooftops. We are seeing, of course, this year a big increase in rooftop, both residential and hopefully coming commercial as well, because of high energy prices, because of the war in Ukraine. But we are not really seeing a big push towards ground-mounted solar from the perspective or from the standpoint of the government, because the government for the last 10 years has been talking about solar rooftops. A lot of even a lot of renewable NGOs have been claiming that we only need solar rooftops, which is just not the case. We need big power plants as well. We need ground mount utility power plants with PPAs as well. So this scenario basically is based on rooftop only growth, or mainly rooftop, because as we will explain later on, even projects that might have received preliminary funding from the Modernization Funds might not be built in the next 5 years if this pessimistic scenario comes true. Our realistic scenario is a bit more optimistic, as you can see. It's basically based on, we will see rooftop growth and some annual growth in ground-mounted power plants as well. And by the way, what you can see is not the total accumulated cost, but accumulated installed capacity, but annual growth. So as we see, we calculate that in the later years of the 20s, we will see growth each year, above 500 megawatts per year, where we think half of it will be ground-mounted solar power plants, and half of it will be rooftops. And then our optimistic scenario, which foresees that this year and next year, the government will, as has been the case in many other European countries, react to the crisis in the energy sector and the war in Ukraine, and will try to remove barriers that are currently hindering the rapid deployment of ground-mounted power plants. And that really could mean that by 2025, we could see an annual growth above 1 gigawatt every year. Historically, as you showed on your slide, we have experience with building a lot in 1 year. In 2010, we connected 1.5 gigawatts. So technically, the potential is there. I think the projects are there as well. And it's all a matter of whether or not the government will allow investors to build their power plants, quicker and to get through those barriers quicker than it is currently the case.
Okay, indeed, it's by looking at the track record, indeed, it's possible to install over 1 gigawatt per year. The right conditions need to be there, but what we can conclude is at least 2 gigawatts. So the market doubling, that's pessimistic. So that's great news, by the way. Now let's dive a bit more into the RES Plus program, which is part of the Modernization Fund from the European Union. These funds are available for 10 countries from the European Union. In the particular case of the Czech Republic, there are 6 billion euros that are available until 2030. This investment is divided into different programs that look at a holistic overview of how to decarbonize the economy. But actually, it's incredible to see that 39% of these funds will directly be allocated to fund and renewable energy projects like solar and wind. So this is really a massive opportunity. And to look at here, I want to describe to you some key program characteristics. So for this first round that happened in 2021, so last year, the subsidy was divided into 2 different segments. There was an open call for projects below 1 megawatt and an open call for projects above 1 megawatt, in which the subsidy was had a maximum ceiling of 50% of the capex investments. In the particular case of projects below 1 megawatt, there was a fixed sum that would be attributed automatically to projects, of course, until a certain capacity was achieved. So it was practically first come, first serve, provided that you comply with the criteria. However, on projects above 1 megawatt, this was the subsidies were allocated on a bidding system that use points, with the maximum subsidy here being being 450 euro per kilowatt peak, so below the for example, the value for ground-mounted or agri-PV of smaller projects. And this bidding system was done using a point system, in which 60% of the points were awarded depending on the costs. So the lesser the cost, the more points you would have. In terms of the technical aspects, you would receive extra points for other applications like agri-PV, floating PV, building integrated PV, or even, of course, ground-mounted bats on brownfields. So it's a way, of course, of incentivizing this particular use of, or double use of PV projects. And then 10% in which some extra points were also awarded to specific regions in the Czech Republic that are so far less decarbonized. There are, of course, a whole set of criteria that we cover very in depth in the report, but here to just go over some of the key aspects is that first you need to have a preliminary grid connection agreement. That's really important before you apply to the subsidy. Then also something that is key is that most of the land in the Czech Republic is part of the agricultural land fund. So you first need to declassify it before being able to present it to the tender. And here, an important note is that the land is classified between 1, which is the most arable land, so the land most suitable for agriculture, and then the maximum being 5, which is land that is less suitable for agriculture. So in the specific case of the subsidies, you could only submit land that was previously classified between 3 and 5. And then the projects need to be commissioned within 2 years for projects below 1 megawatt, and within 5 years for projects above 1 megawatt. Just to share with you the results for projects above 1 megawatt, there were 110 millions that were distributed over 530 megawatt peak. So it means that the subsidy was around 200,000 euro per megawatt peak, quite a significant amount. But the most exciting part is that actually there's a second round ongoing right now, which Jan is going to talk us a little bit more about.
As Marcel said, this year we saw a second round. The first round we still see as a sort of a test round where the state fund for the environment, which administers the Modernization Fund, where they tested out the water, saw how many people were willing to submit projects at what price, and even a lot of investors saw this as a test run, so they didn't submit their projects. We have four open programs now, as opposed to 2 last year. The first one are pretty much the same as last year, 1 below 1 megawatt, 1 above 1 megawatt. Below 1 megawatt is interesting because the allocation, again, 60 million euro fixed price for fixed subsidies, again, pretty much the same criteria. What is, by the way, not possible is splitting up projects to make them, to theoretically have them below 1 megawatt. So maybe some of you are active in Hungary, where I think every power plant officially has 499 kilowatts, even though it's much bigger. So that's not the case in the Czech Republic. They will be looking quite hard to evaluate if, let's say, projects that are very close together have the same ownership structure. So if you really want to build large PV from the Modernization Fund, you have to go to this large call where investors again are competing. They can say they submit their price, and then funds are allocated from the bottom up depending on who has the most points. Where prices is one part, and Marcel mentioned the other parts being points awarded for storage, specific locations, and so on. There, the allocation is higher. It's 220 million euro. So the ministry saw that the interest is high. In the first round, there were projects submitted that didn't fulfill the criteria for formal reasons, so they're being submitted again now. And what is new is we're seeing two REST Plus programs for community, one small, one large. For small municipalities, it's mostly on rooftops, and for large communities or municipalities, it includes even ground-mounted solar power plants that should be used for energy communities or shared energy use in a municipality. That is quite new. We're ourselves quite curious to see what the interest will be. How many municipalities will match up or will link up with investors to build, for example, large-scale solar power plants outside the town or city or village, and use the energy on site, because that's quite an interesting project. The details of the calls are pretty much the same as in the last round. And what is important, the messages from the ministry is that they think that, they're assuring us that the calls should be coming until 2030, and they should be really ongoing. Because as you can maybe see, the deadline for the smaller projects is until next March, but the deadline for large projects actually ends at the end of October. But we are being assured that again next year, because of the enormous sums available in the Modernization Fund overall, which and maybe to say the entire allocation of the Modernization Fund is linked to the price of CO2 certificates. So in the end, we might see, and the share of the 39% should still remain the same. We should be seeing more and more calls over the next years as well. I think that's probably the most important things about this current round of calls.
Great, thanks, Jan. And let's before we move on, let's actually launch a poll, because it would be very interesting to actually understand from the audience here if your company is already participating or is planning to participate in any of the current calls of the ARIS Plus program. So we know, of course, that there's a big audience, that almost half of the audience is is actually looking and exploring at the market. So this might be too early of a call, but there's also almost half of the people here that are already active in the Czech Republic. So let's give it a few more seconds and then share the results with all of you. Okay, I think we missed the results, but maybe I can. Okay, they're here. All right, so there's a fifth of the companies here attending that are planning to participate, or that are participating. I would assume that the biggest majority would be companies that are already involved. So Jan, how should we look at it? How should we look at it? So of course this is a limited audience out of the market, but is there any conclusion that we can take from these results, or not really?
I think maybe the message I'm taking from this is we see how many, or considering how many respondents or how many participants are active in the Czech market. I think if you're not active in the Czech market, maybe the first instinct is to wait to find out more about the Czech market, about the Modernization Fund, and then maybe enter projects sooner. Or of course, I mean, it has to be said that the Modernization Fund, it's an investment subsidy, which for large-scale solar is not really common in Europe. It's not a premium feed-in tariff auction system. No, it's so you build, and once you're finished, you get some money from the state back for the capex, which we know from across Europe for small rooftops, but not for multi-megawatt installations. So we also seeing that the Czech market is itself finding its way how to approach the Modernization Fund. And of course, as we know, there are companies that don't want to use any state subsidies at all, which is of course a legitimate standpoint as well.
Indeed. All right, we're ready to continue.
In the study, we also outlined the project development cycle, which I think is very important to see what the expectations are in terms of project development, speed, barriers, Just maybe an outline, the initial stage where you know, finding land, preparing basic documents, basic project documentation, then leads into two, I think, big bottlenecks, which is the grid connection application and the building and zoning permits, which or the changing of the spatial plans, which we will be talking about shortly. While there are fixed dates set for grid connection, the grid connection process, the application, which theoretically and in practice is the DSOs are adhering to those timelines, which are outlined in the project, in the reports. There aren't really any deadlines set for building and zoning permits, and indeed changing of spatial plans. So we've outlined a minimum timeline. Of course, some parts can be done simultaneously. Then one important part which is different in the Czech Republic is that power plants above 1 megawatt have to be so-called authorized by the Ministry of Industry and Trade. This again seems like a formal procedure. It takes about 3 to 4 months before the whole process is over and done with. At the moment, we don't really see projects being refused by the ministry. Then, of course, the construction, and at the end, the final connection, which can be, again, another bottleneck, because with the amount of projects being built this year, the DSOs are announcing that the final connection of the power plants can also take a bit of time. And of course, you need a license from the energy regulator in the Czech Republic, which, again, it's also rather a formality. So I think if you overall the initial stage, or the getting the project to the ready to build phase, we expect it to definitely be at least a year, because of some unknowns that, you know, every investor has to deal with when it comes to the build, or just to the permits. And of course, we know from discussions with colleagues from, for example, at Solar Power Europe, that the Czech Republic is by far not the only country. I think building permits is permits is quite a problem in all of Europe currently.
Right.
If we then move to the bottlenecks that we've identified, maybe just to give you an overview of what the main problems are. Grid capacity, I think, is a topic everywhere in Europe. While there are countries that offer investors transparent real-time maps of available or reserved capacity in the grid, the Czech Republic does not currently have that. Our country is operated by 3 DSOs according to regions. Every DSO has a bit of a different approach to connecting power plants, but what they all have in common is there's no real indicative real-time map where you can find out which regions have or have not, or don't have available grid capacity. While maybe 10 or 12 years ago there was the possibility of basically just calling the DSO and asking them if there was capacity in a given region before acquiring a plot of land or entering into an agreement with the landowner. This is not the case now. There is theoretically the possibility of submitting a non-binding informal inquiry, but basically the DSOs then ask you to submit a normal request for connection. So quite often you don't really see whether there is a connection capacity available in some regions before you actually officially apply for grid connection. But to apply for grid connection, you need an agreement with the landowner. So it's a bit of a chicken and the egg situation, and we're hoping this will clear up soon. Again, this all comes from a situation where for 10 years we haven't been building basically any solar power plants. And the DSOs are also now waking up to this new reality when solar power has to be installed very, very quickly. But as Marcel mentioned, you do need grid capacity or grid connection, either a contract or a preliminary agreement to enter projects into the Modernization Fund.
Jan, could I ask before we go to the next point on the land? So basically, you're saying that there's very limited visibility at a local level, but do we know, for example, if there are any specific parts of the country that are least congested because of their specific characteristics and of course the DSO, right? Because there are different regional DSOs, or not really?
Well, not really, because the paradox is, for example, in regions with a very you have to realize, the Czech Republic or Czechia is a very industrialized country. We rely on heavy industry. We have a lot of power plants. We're a power exporter, I think one of the few in Europe at the moment. But in regions where the grid is very well built up, that's also the region where a lot of projects are being submitted, and a lot of, for example, old power plants, coal and thermal power plants are being operated. But at the same time, those are in some districts, those are the regions where the operators of those power plants are already thinking of switching to renewables. While for example, in regions where there is, let's say, more space available, that also means that sometimes the grid is not as built up. And it has to be said that we in the Solar Association sometimes hear that one investor was not successful in a specific region and another investor was successful. So it really sometimes depends on literally the location and at what point you're connecting to which line. What we're not seeing in the Czech Republic currently is a lot of projects that will be connected to the TSO and to the transmission lines. Of course, we know that from other countries that is a possibility. Even in Czechia, by law, you can do that. You can apply. There are again rules, and they're quite similar. But of course, this incurs costs which are really only feasible for really large scale projects. But so we're seeing investors that are already thinking about maybe circumventing problems with the DSOs and then connecting directly to the transmission service operator. Okay.
And in terms of land, Jan, can you explain a bit what we're seeing here in the map? So is this related to the agricultural classification? Is this does that include topography as well and other elements?
This is a map issued by the Ministry of the Environment, because of course, when you apply, for example, for a building permits or for zoning permits, there are a lot of factors that will be factored into, PV or renewables in the Czech Republic are not currently in the so-called public interest as they are in other countries. I think Germany pushed it through this year. So when you currently apply for permits, you still have to go through the whole process, of the effects that the project will have on just things like the aesthetics of the countryside and so on. So the Ministry of the Environment several years ago created a map which is supposed to be a first help for investors where they think you can build and can't build solar power plants. The red zones are, for example, national parks or protected areas close to rivers, where definitely during the building permits, the local authorities or the ministry will not allow a power plant to be built. Yellow areas are more suitable, and green areas are suitable according to the ministry. But then, as you mentioned, you still have to compare this to the state agricultural fund, because some areas that are, for example, green on this map might be very arable regions in the Czech Republic. We're talking about, for example, the southeast is a very good country for agricultural activities, where large regions are very fertile soil, where you will probably in the future only will be able to build agri PV projects. But it is a first map for entering the market to roughly know where to look for land, or rather where not to look for land. Because what we are of course seeing is, with this solar boom, landowners trying to sell land in areas where that might even be in national park or protected areas where you know for a fact that you will never get a building permit for a large-scale ground-mounted PV projects there. So this is one of those first ports of call for investors. Look for that. Exactly.
All right. Perfect. Let's zoom in into more of these challenges, and the next one that we see here. All right. In terms of the spatial plan, so you showed in the project timeline the need for a spatial plan. Not every municipality has a spatial plan, and this needs to be. This process needs to be activated with the municipality where your land is. So, Jan, how common is that a municipality don't have a spatial plan? And if they don't, how do you proceed? Can you explain a bit more on how, what are the challenges that you can expect here in this step?
I think this is similar to quite a lot of other countries. I think at least Austria, Germany, I think Poland have the same basic outline. Today, roughly about from the 6,000 municipalities in Czechia, about 10% don't have a spatial plan. Usually smaller towns and villages in the countryside, which quite often have suitable land because they are rural areas. What it means is basically in the Czech Republic or in Czechia, like in many other countries, you can only build in areas that are defined by municipality's spatial plan as suited for construction of anything. There are zones for residential zones, commercial zones, and then there are zones for production, which also means production of energy, special zones. And quite often, or typically land that is suitable for PV, because you can't go where you have to go where the sun shines, and with wind you have to go where the wind blows. You can't really not flexible from that point of view. So usually you have to approach the municipality, ask them to change the spatial plan to allow you to build, or to basically draw into the spatial plan your plot land or your plot of lands to designate that you can build here. This is currently a big bottleneck because changing of the spatial plan is a purely political decision. It has to be done by the local council. So it's not like a building permit where if you fulfill certain criteria, you can build. Theoretically, this is you basically have to convince the local municipality to change the spatial plans, which in I think the current climate in the entire world with this NIMBY approach and problems that we're having all across Europe. With for example, which basically led Germany to compel local municipalities to designate 2% of the area for wind. We're seeing the same problem with the Czech Republic. This is one of the things we're hoping to change, because at the end it all depends on the local political council or local municipal council on whether they want you to build your project or not.
Okay, great. And I think in terms of the agricultural lands, I think it's similar. It goes in line with the second point, which is apart from this first layer, then for example, the agricultural lands, it's very unlikely that you will get the permit to build in land with category 1 or 2, which are the most arable. But there might be some nuances. So Jan, I want to ask you like 2 brief questions. Maybe one we will cover later. So let me know and maybe save it for later. But the first question is indeed like, when was this land categorized? So is it accurate that a land that is categorized as 1 is really very, very high quality? And the second question is, does this apply to agri-PV, for example?
Very good questions. The first one is the classification was done about 50 years ago, in the 1970s, okay. And had a lot of very intensive agriculture. Especially in the communist countries with collectivization and farmers not really owning their land. I think the connection between the farmer and the land and the quality of the land in some cases has dropped. So we are seeing investors, for example, working to reclassify the land, which is possible if you have, for example, an expert, and there are certain institutions which can help you reclassify the land, because what we are seeing is quite often land which was classified as very arable 50 years ago. After 50 years of heavy agriculture, the land is now probably would be reclassified again as maybe 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 even. So there's definitely something worth looking into, and it indeed will not be the case for agri-PV. For agri-PV, we will come back to this later, but agri-PV, you should basically be able to build on any land, because you will not need to extract it at all. But other criteria applies.
Okay, perfect. And so yeah, we might need to accelerate a bit here because we have some topics to cover, but at the same time I want to respond to some questions. So just want to incentivize here the audience to ask your questions right now. We will make sure to answer them. So please go ahead. We want to understand what your doubts are. So if you allow me to go very quickly through this last topic, so you can then move on to the next. In terms of the brownfields, we just talked that the Czech Republic is a very industrial country with different land uses. So there are quite some land that is classified as brownfield, which is typically classified as suitable for PV. So there's an official registry that you can take a look and see whether and see whether that land might be fitable to your project. So it's kind of a third layer for the lands that we're talking on here. Jan, can we move on?
Okay.
All right then.
Okay, so the Marcel mentioned agri-PV. I'll quickly go through what the situation with agri-PV is, because we know that it's a very interesting topic for a lot of investors, because we have a whole customer base that you can approach, farmers. As I said, there are regions in the Czech Republic which we think will be very suitable only for agri-PV. We're currently pushing for legislative changes, which would mean that you can build on any fertile land of any category without the need to extract it from the agricultural fund. At the same time, there would be inspections, regular inspections, to see whether there is actually agricultural activity going on beneath the panels. We think that the changes should be implemented hopefully maybe at the beginning of next year. And if all goes well, you would not need even to change spatial plans for agri-PV. So that could be a very promising area in the Czech Republic, which might really kickstart the growth of ground-mounted projects. And another interesting aspect is floating PV, because according to Czech law, which we had this confirmed not only by lawyers but by people from the ministry, currently floating PV is actually not a building. There's a sort of loophole in the law, not anything. It's like a house, one of those houseboats. You don't really need a permit, and you don't need a building permit. You do need a building permit for the connection line, but this is a potential area which might be interesting to developers, because you can probably sideline a lot of legislative or administrative barriers. And maybe I'll quickly go through what we're currently pushing for, and to ease the bottlenecks. Last week, the ministry announced, after months of waiting, that they would raise the limit of building permits from currently 20 kilowatts to 50 kilowatts, which we know is not really probably what people join this seminar for, or this webinar for. But it's important to know that, because we currently see a big boom in rooftops. This means that we won't have local building councils or building permit authority. Those issuing the building permits will not be swamped by thousands of applications. So this will avoid a bottleneck for larger projects as well. We would like to see renewables as a strategic project of so-called technical infrastructure, which again should mean easier easier permitting in terms of the spatial plans. Permitting connection lines as well. We would like to see them as again, part of technical infrastructure. We would again like to see, as in many other countries, renewables as buildings of public interest, which of course then during the building permit gives you like a high authority. And what we really want to see is, like in other countries, go-to zones for renewables, where municipalities themselves decide, okay, you can build here and here and here in our municipality. And the last bit, which we're hoping for, would be that renewables should be about 1 megawatt should be authorized by a special project where the building permits are issued by a special central office in Prague, which again should speed up the process by several months. So as I said, if most of those changes are pushed through, then I really think we could see a rapid deployment of solar PV, ground mounted PV in that year.
All right, let's hope for that optimistic scenario, and thank you for your work on behalf of the whole industry. So then, briefly going to the last topic, we really want to encourage you to make questions, so please go ahead. But to cover this last topic, so here we present a non-extensive overview of the costs. This study was done in June 2022. And for example, costs that are related to development, we interview several developers in the market, and costs that are related to construction, we interview several installers in the market. So these are, for the most part, estimations based on the market. So, for example, here in terms of land purchase or land lease, you can see what are the values per megawatt peak. Something very important that I want to mention here on the grid connection, these values are practically what you need to pay to the operator, to the DSO, in case that you commit to build or to pay for the construction costs for the grid, right? Because otherwise the prices can be a bit higher. Is that correct, Jan? It's something that we mentioned in the report.
Yes, these prices are fixed by law, and different options. You can either pay for everything yourself or ask the DSO to build the infrastructure for you. And again, it depends whether you want to connect to the DSO or the TSO, and of course it depends on the size of the project. So this is why there's quite a wide gap, and it's detailed in the report.
Exactly. Then in terms of the development costs, this is an aggregated of all the costs of all the permits that you need to comply with. It's important to note that it doesn't include man hours. So here typically the cost would be higher as we see in other countries, right? This is not the full DevEx that the developer would charge you for example, a co-development partnership. And then in terms of construction, here in terms of the prices, we're really looking at, of course, also including the components, right? The inverters, the panels, everything. So take it with a grain of salt, because also these prices have been growing so fast from last year and will potentially grow. So maybe while we wait for some questions, maybe we can already comment on this, which is how volatile are these prices right now, Jan?
Quite high, quite volatile. I speak to, of course, investors regularly, and even installers, and we saw again growth even from last year, but even within this year, there were months where, after the Russian invasion of Ukraine, prices for metals went up. So yeah, that's certainly a big problem with construction of with construction material. Panels again, when there was the bottleneck in the ports of Shanghai, we saw prices go up. So I think really it's important to know, and I think everybody who is in the solar industry knows that the prices are quite volatile at the moment. So yeah, as you say, this was a snapshot in June 2022. And in the meantime, again, because of rising energy prices, we might see another growth in costs again.
Indeed. And just a small note on the O&M. This is preventive maintenance, which includes monitoring. So it's not full O&M scope, which is typically around, which would typically be around 10,000 euros in Europe, so a bit higher. Then let's go to the last slides to cover a bit more on the revenues, on the revenue side of the business model. And here I'm actually going to already use this question from the audience. So here we have a question regarding to explain a bit more what the electricity prices are for the industry. Why? Because the person wants to better understand if it is financially attractive to invest in subsidy-free commercial rooftop as a PPA, right? So just a couple of considerations, and then maybe we can respond right away to the question. Yeah. So again, highlighting, we talked about this before, but highlighting that the subsidies are only on the capex, on the investments, but then you need to, of course, sell your electricity on the long term, which means that you now have two options, the PPAs or the spot market. However, there's still quite a limited track record of PPAs in the market. So one for solar, one for wind. Here, let's say self-consumption PPA for rooftops, so similar to what the question is. So this already exists, but it's really getting started. So there's a lot of potential, but this market really requires international investors that have experience on international PPAs, because you will most probably require a PPA, or you can sell on the spot market, which right now is very high, but there are no guarantees, right? So maybe we can comment, Jan, you can comment on the electricity prices and on the question, which was what is the value of electricity prices and how to make a PV PPA attractive in a rooftop model.
I think it's important to say we all know that talking about energy prices, they are more or less the same as in Germany. But I think it's important to say, especially when it comes to industrial clients, whatever I say now might not be valid in a month's time. So I think it's important rather to assume that that because we have quite high fixed costs, grid operating costs, we have costs for consumers, for old existing renewable power plants, which the government has now cancelled for the next year to ease the burden on electricity consumers. But still, we have quite high fixed costs, I think one of the largest in Europe. So I believe that any PV project that can deliver electricity for a fixed price of 80, 100, 120 euro will be competitive, because they are already beating the cost that were paid by people a year ago before the start of the energy crisis for on-site PPAs. And what's also important to know is for on-site PPAs, you don't need an electricity license if you're selling behind the meter. So it's actually quite simple to theoretically to do. The reason why we haven't seen those PPAs was because subsidies were available to companies, and most companies wanted to own their own power plants. But now we see a sort of a shift in this thinking. So we are really a market that is open for PPAs, suitable, I think. And in terms of energy prices, I think, as I say, no matter what I say now about energy prices, it will not be valid in 2 or 3 months' time. But what will be valid is that I believe that any solar power plant will be able to deliver energy on site cheaper than from the grid at any point.
All right, perfect. So so we're already on top of the time. So there are no other questions so far. But what I really encourage you is that if you still have questions, we will send you an email with the recordings. So please feel free to get back at us with any question that you might have, with any comments. Of course, if you have a specific question for Jan, we'll we'll forward it to you, Jan. But really appreciate your time to be here with us to explain a bit more in depth all the intricacies about the Czech Republic markets, as well as reminding everyone that is interested in the market and there's a big part that it's still considering whether to enter or not. We have prepared the report that it's available at solarplaza.com/consultancy for the Czech Republic, because that will very probably help you a lot in your decision whether to enter or not, to run some initial numbers and to look a bit more into what are the subsidies available, what are the challenges that you might find along the way. So that resource will certainly support you to discover whether that's a good market for your organization. In our opinion, it is, but you need to run your own numbers. So again, thanks a lot for everyone being here. I hope the webinar was of value to you. And thanks again to our local expert Jan and to the Solar Association for co-organizing this webinar.
Thank you, Marcel, and thank you for Solarplaza Consultancy for giving us the chance to talk about the Czech market, which we hope will be quite interesting for a lot of investors in the next years.
Great, thanks, and have a good day, everyone. Goodbye.
Bye.